I'm just going to come right out and say it. It looks like they don't want this war to end. Here, check this out.
Glenn Greenwald is host of System Update on Rumble. He joins us tonight to assess this. Glenn, thanks for coming on. For the second time that we know of, the Biden administration has shut down any attempt to reach a brokered ceasefire. Why do you think that is?
From the very beginning, it's been clear that the U.S. wants this war to continue and wants it to go on for as long as possible because they have no interest in protecting Ukraine. They instead want to sacrifice Ukraine, have Ukraine destroyed in order to advance what they think is the United States' political interest, geopolitical interest of weakening Russia. And the way to do that is to use Ukraine as a pawn, kill as many Ukrainians as possible, destroy their whole country if they have to, in order to prolong the war as long as possible. And the response of the U.S. government and its defenders has been, we don't have any position about when the war ends. That's completely up to the Ukrainians. When they want to end the war, they can end the war. If they don't, we'll support them. And the lie just got revealed. If you listen to what John Kirby said, they asked him, are the Ukrainians willing to have a ceasefire? And he said, not only won't they, we won't allow it either. Essentially admitting finally what's long been obvious, that the country funding the war, providing the arms for the war, which is the United States, determines if and when the war ends. And we obviously don't want that war to end.
Pentagon spending has totaled over $14 trillion since the start of the war in Afghanistan, with 1/3 to 1/2 of the total going to military contractors. Plus the members of Congress who personally profited from their own or their spouse's financial investments in top weapons contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. And let's not forget about the mainstream media. It's like they're all about keeping this war machine going and even upping up the military confrontation. Some of the people that I have been listening to have even been saying that it's Biden and the mainstream media that caused this war to continue. But what do you guys think? Do you feel like we should be putting an end to this war already? Drop a quick comment, yes or no, down below. I remember this quote from the 1984 author George Orwell. He put it, quote, all the war propaganda, all the screaming and lies and hatred comes invariably from people who are not fighting, end quote. This guy, he literally wrote the book about Big Brother always watching and always listening. So yeah, it kind of makes sense what he's saying here. I mean, just take a look at what's happening to us right here in our own country. While they are funneling literally trillions of dollars into the military industrial complex abroad, Americans are just struggling at the dinner table, at the checkout counter, and at the gas pump. Y'all know what I'm saying. Analysts are already sounding a red alert recession as real estate investors are already seeing a start of what they're calling an Airbnb bust. And this is on the short-term rental industry and what this could mean for the wider economy. So definitely sit back, grab a cup of coffee, definitely get comfortable. And as always, this is going to be a big one. And for the best way to invest in gold, hit the link in the description down below this video. It's time to protect ourselves, folks. I heard from a war vet online. This is what he had to say about all of it. He said that he's a war veteran from Iraqi freedom, and there is no way in hell I would fight another war for America. I was wrong, and I regret ever setting foot in Iraq. I was tricked, and it disgusts me what the government did. I think that this is actually a reflection of what a lot of Americans are feeling right now. It's kind of like the government is steering our country to war when the vast majority of Americans actually do not want it. Facts are facts, and there is a lot of government spending going into this war machine. There are a number of politicians with their hands in the cookie jar that are weapons companies. And you know where else these politicians have their investments in? Mainstream media. Specifically, mainstream media pushing the continuation of the war effort. You put all this together and you'll have a perfectly oiled war machine on your hands. So first and foremost, we're really a financial education channel, so let's do exactly that. Follow the money, right? So the Pentagon spent a whopping $14 trillion since the start of the war in Afghanistan, with a big chunk of that money going straight to military contractors. And get this, guys, just 5 major corporations, including Lockheed Martin and Boeing, have received 1/4 to 1/3 of all Pentagon contracts in recent years. It's crazy just to think that Lockheed Martin alone got $75 billion in Pentagon contracts in 2020, which is way more than the entire budget for the State Department and Agency for International Development combined. But it's not just the amount of money that's being spent that is concerning. Weapons makers have already spent a crazy $2.5 billion on lobbying over the past 2 decades, employing over 700 lobbyists per year on average in the last 5 years. And so that's like having more than 1 lobbyist for every member of Congress. And to make matters worse, some companies have even taken advantage of the wartime conditions to overcharge the government or even engage in outright fraud. In fact, the Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan estimated waste, fraud, and abuse totaled between $31 billion and $60 billion. Now that's a lot of money, guys. Now with the United States reducing its military presence in Iraq and Afghanistan, some people are using China as the new rationale for keeping the Pentagon budget at high levels. And you know who will continue to profit from this inflated spending? You guessed it, guys, military contractors. Now get this, members of Congress actually have a personal stake in keeping the war money flowing. I mean, just one example, 20 members of Congress invested in top weapons contractors that benefited from the $40 billion in the Ukraine aid that was passed a while back. And it's not just any companies. We're talking about Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, whose stock has been on the rise ever since Russia invaded the Ukraine. Now, one of the Congress people is Republican Representative John Rutherford from Florida, who bought between $1,000 and $15,000 worth of Raytheon stock on the same day that Russia invaded Ukraine. Oh, and get this. So Rutherford actually serves on the House Appropriations Committee that's responsible for the federal government spending. Now, in that role, he serves on the subcommittee for Homeland Security, as well as the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Subcommittee. So let me repeat that, military construction. Now, I mean, like, they're not even trying to hide the greediness anymore at this point. Another Republican, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, she bought between $1,000 and $15,000 worth of Lockheed Martin shares just a couple days before, tweeting about how war is big business for our leaders. Yeah, I think she proved that herself with her personal sizable weapons company investment. Now, critics are calling this out, and rightfully so. Now, I think you guys can agree with me on this one. There is definitely a major conflict of interest for these lawmakers. I mean, we're talking about people who have official responsibilities and are supposed to be looking out for the public good by buying stock in companies that stand to benefit from decisions that they make in Congress. And it's not just these two. It's like over a dozen other members of Congress or their families who have very similar investments, all while President Biden just approved a $350 million military aid package for the Ukraine. And that was just the first one that they approved. As of the latest count, Congress appropriated more than $112 billion in the Ukraine-Russian war. Biden's latest comments on the subject, quote, "I thought it was critical that there not be any doubt, none whatsoever, about the U.S. support for Ukraine in the war," end quote. So yeah, that's basically our president declaring that the United States is going to back Ukraine as long as it takes. And the mainstream media certainly is not helping. In fact, most news channels seem to be egging on the conflict. One war critic put it this way, quote, "These media repeats the same thing over and over again until people start to believe it." And this is despite the fact, or even in light of the fact, that the mainstream media has been shown to have told egregious lies over the course of our history, including WMD in Iraq, and the list goes on and on. So the media is sneaky when it comes to pushing for war. I mean, just one example, an article that I read from the Associated Press that claims Americans think that Biden isn't being tough enough on Russia. They go on and on about this poll, but they conveniently leave out the fact that almost as many Americans are freaking out about getting involved in a war with Russia. Plus, they fail to mention that the poll shows way more people are concerned about getting dragged into a war than they are about Biden not being tough enough. But the article still makes it seem like Biden's biggest problem is not wanting to go to war. And if you think about it, the U.S. government is at least partly to blame for the starting of the Ukraine-Russia conflict in the first place. The U.S. is pushing to expand NATO eastward, and establishing friendly relations with Ukraine has increased the likelihood of war between nuclear-armed powers and laid the groundwork for Vladimir Putin's aggressive position toward the Ukraine. So here's what one expert had to say about it. "I think all the trouble in this case really started in April 2008 at the NATO summit in Bucharest, where afterward, NATO issued a statement that said Ukraine and Georgia would become part of NATO. The Russians made it unequivocally clear at that time that they viewed this as an existential threat, and they drew a line in the sand. Nevertheless, what has happened with the passage of time is that we have moved forward to include Ukraine in the West to make Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border. Now, of course, this includes more than just NATO's expansion. NATO expansion is the heart of the strategy, but it includes EU expansion as well, and it includes turning Ukraine into a pro-American liberal democracy, and from a Russian perspective, this is an existential threat. It's kind of like the United States kept pushing and pushing until Russia just kind of got backed into a corner, and they had to make a choice to go to war or cowing to the United States, and we all know how that turned out. We have more in common than they want us to believe. Together we stand, divided we fall. I mean, you're probably wondering, what am I talking about, right? Well, what's happening to regular people abroad is exactly what's happening to working class Americans right now. We're all getting caught in this political and economic crossfire. I mean, just look, red alert recession signals from all of the major financial news chains. Inflation is still raging even as many commodity prices have dropped sharply. Tensions with China have intensified even after the US shot down a spy balloon from the country. If you add in the recent turmoil in the banking sector, and conditions have taken a serious turn for the worse. Now, the Federal Reserve tried to do something about it last week by raising interest rates a little bit, but not as much as they were thinking of doing just a few weeks ago. Still, things are still going to get even tighter because smaller banks that are pretty important to the United States lending, they are struggling. That means it's even harder to get a loan, which is basically like a rate hike. A lot of people are saying we're headed for a recession, and they're not just regular people, but big time investors like Bill Gross and Jeff Gundlach. Even Jerome Powell's favorite market indicator is flashing warning signs that a recession is going to be coming sometime this year. Now, another really big recession hint is Airbnb real estate investors are talking about. Whispers of an apocalyptic Airbnb bust have spread online among short-term rental hosts that are facing empty booking calendars, stiff competition for guests, and tumbling earnings. The shift has sparked fears of an irreversible slide in the business and a broader economic slowdown. Anybody have any insight into this whole Airbnb things? I would love to hear more from you guys. Now, me personally, I was actually looking at purchasing a vacation property in the Florida area, and I began to see the warning signs of this Airbnb bust happening months ago. Unfortunately, but fortunately, we ended up not purchasing the property and delaying the purchase. And so we're kind of waiting for this Airbnb bust real estate market crash to happen so we can scoop up some deals. But I would love to hear more from you guys. Drop me some comments down below. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you're seeing boots on the ground. But yeah, the economic picture is really not looking too good, guys. Recession is coming together with layoffs and bankruptcy for millions of Americans. And what is our government doing? They're making things worse with interest rate hikes and pumping the war machine. My advice? Get your cash ready, folks. Stash it somewhere safe. Many other folks are investing in gold, buying up gold now. For the best way to invest in gold, there's a link in the description down below. But keep working at your income streams, keep working at your side hustles, and keep working at your cash flow. That's what's going to be really, really important during these tough times. But we're going to talk more about that in the next one. Just make sure you're subscribed and make sure your notification bell's turned on. Now, with that, this was your U.S. war update and financial news report. Weapons companies, Congress, the mainstream media, they're all working together to push this war down our throats, and the real story happening behind the scenes. And what we should be preparing for is a recession for the regular Americans. Now, the truth may be hard to hear, but I know you guys appreciate me telling you guys exactly how it is. Just let me tell you guys, I really appreciate you, every single one of you guys. You guys keep me sane during these tough times. Please be kind to one another, and I'll see you on the next video.